The cat I must save from extinction. Of course, it's the skull of a saber-toothed cat, the most famous extinct cat of all.
I've always wanted my own saber-toothed tiger skull, so in this video I'm going to make one. So I started by cutting some 2x4s to length. I use 2x4s because I don't like going to the wood store and it's what I had. Next, I cut the wood to width on the table saw. This removes the rounded edges and makes the glue up a lot easier. I didn't have any wood wide enough for the main block, so I had to glue two separate pieces together. I also made a smaller block for the jawbone, and I'll make the long teeth later on. Once I had the wood glued together, I marked out what I can remove on the table saw so I can save time later while carving. The table saw blade couldn't reach high enough to do some of these cuts, so I had to finish them with a handsaw. When I'm making this, I'm always referencing the plans I drew, which have the side, top, and front view. Here I'm using an angle grinder and a flap disc, and I did this outside to avoid getting too much dust in the shop. This smaller block of wood is going to be the jawbone, and I'm doing the exact same thing as I just did to the skull, removing wood with a table saw and then carving it with an angle grinder. I'm making the jawbone separate from the skull because I don't ever plan on connecting them. You'll see how I do that later. So now that most of the wood was removed, I can start work on the details. And for this I used a Dremel tool. I was also constantly marking the wood so I knew exactly where to carve and referencing my drawings as well. There's 6 holes that go all the way through the skull, so I would use a drill to drill a pilot hole and then make it bigger with the Dremel. So every time I made a mistake, I would use Bondo to fix it. It cures in about 5 minutes, and once the skull's painted, you can't even tell it's there. One of the Dremel bits that I found most useful was this cylindrical one. It's good for removing a lot of wood in areas that the table saw or the angle grinder couldn't reach. Using the chisel saves time as well. So this long nail is going to be where the jawbone connects to the skull. I wanted to get the grooves in the skull to line up with each other. So this nail helped, but as you see, a lot of the Bondo ripped out on the left side there. I really wanted the jaw to move, but also be easily removable. So my solution was to make a magnetic hinge. So I cut up this nail and glued it to the jawbone with super glue. I don't know if this is the best way to do this because I'm not a welder. Here I'm making a groove in the skull that I can add magnets to. And the tricky part is that once the jaw is in place, it needs to line up with the front of the teeth on the skull. This took some trial and error, but eventually I got the magnets in a spot where when the jaw closes, the two sets of teeth interlock. The nice thing about using magnets is I can paint over them and the hinge will be basically invisible. Whenever I felt an area of the skull was done, I'd use this sanding bit on my Dremel tool. This got rid of any marks that the cutting bits made in the wood. This is me making the two big front teeth. I cut them out with a jigsaw and then did most of the shaping on the belt sander with a very rough grit, and then finished it with a Dremel tool. I temporarily hot glued them in place first, and then I used 2 pencils to get the spacing right for when I did the actual glue up. To connect them to the skull, I used nails, and then I glued it together with Bondo, which seemed to work pretty well. The glue up took about 10 minutes. Once the teeth were on, all I had to do was finish up the jawbone, and then it was time to paint. I started by using a white primer, and then I moved on to a very dark brown on the entire skull. So to make the skull a lighter brown, I use a technique called dry brushing. Basically, you get as much of the paint off of the brush as possible with a paper towel, and then lightly go over what you're painting to just hit the high areas. I also use a heat gun to dry the paint faster and speed up the whole process. So for the teeth, I started with a base coat of a pale yellow, and then I put some white on just the tips of the teeth, and some brown in the cracks closer to the skull. And after that, it was finished. The skull is 32 centimeters long and it's 18.5 centimeters wide. As you can see, the jaw can open and close and is removable.